This is The Future Of, where experts share their vision of the future and how their work is helping shape it for the better.
Hello, I'm Tom Robinson. The recent Black Lives Matter protests across Australia have sparked fresh discussions about reconciliation. For Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, it's been a time of reflection, learning from our history and contemplating how we can do better to recognise, celebrate and unite all Australians. To discuss this topic with us today is Curtin Nyungar Cultural Advisor Mrs Ingrid Cumming and Curtin Research Fellow Professor Cheryl Kickett-Tucker. Thanks for coming in today, Ingrid and Cheryl.
Kaya. Whee. Same.
Same.
So Ingrid, to you, what is reconciliation?
Reconciliation really for me is how we bring together two very unique worlds to go forward together as one, to maybe rewrite some of the history when first contacts occurred from the perspectives of each other, particularly from the colonials' point of view of the worth and the knowledge that was already there and maybe not collaborating more than we would hope. So reconciliation is about really remembering where we've come from, but also thinking about the vast amount of opportunities in front of us to work together, two very unique worldviews and perspectives, to make sure that my kids walk a much easier path in the hands of their non-Indigenous brothers and sisters.
Cheryl, what does reconciliation mean to you?
Well, first of all, it's not a once-off event like in a week. That's the first thing I'd like to say. It's a process and it's actually a lifelong journey. And I think it's a lifelong journey where non-Aboriginal people really have to sit up and listen to the stories and the histories of Aboriginal people, because that hasn't been done. And I don't think anyone can reconcile until the past is acknowledged. And our histories are put into schools as well, because at the moment we only hear the European side of the version of Australia's histories, and we don't have our histories in school systems. It's supposed to be, and it's part of the cultural standards framework for the education department. But when teachers look for information, they're getting it off websites and stuff that aren't done by Aboriginal people. So it's still from a perspective of a non-Indigenous person. So that's the first thing, and reconciliation is about non-Aboriginal people learning and getting over their guilt, because you can't bring two tribes together unless one tribe acknowledges what's happened to the other tribe, basically. So I'd like to say that from reconciliation is a lifelong journey, and it's a pathway that has to be taken by everybody. But I think the road ahead for non-Aboriginal people is far longer and traumatic for them if they don't listen to our people in the first place. You can't walk behind or in front of us, you've got to walk beside us. And to walk beside us, you've got to see the world through our lens, and you can't do that unless you acknowledge what's happened in the past first. Now, some non-Aboriginal people will acknowledge that and they'll do that, and they'll, they don't know much about our people, and they'll go along and they'll understand and they'll learn all that history, and they'll make lifelong friends in our community. But then you've got a cohort of people that won't want to do that. And that's difficult. That piece is difficult, particularly if they're holding privileged positions in government. And when we're looking at reconciliation in government, particularly local, state and fed, and people who haven't reconciled with the past, they still have a view of how we are. There's low expectations. They can't do this, they can't do that. They pigeonhole our people, pigeonhole our community groups, and that's not reconciliation. So it's a personal journey first, and then an organisation or a government facility then has to do that institutional reconciliation as well. So it's a big, big, big thing. But there's always hope, always hope, always hope. And as Aboriginal people, we are an inclusive group of people, and we'll always accept everybody into our realm, into our sphere of life. And people will have different, parts of the journey, like a train track, and they'll jump off at different stations and maybe they'll come back on, because they've got to reconcile with themselves first before they can reconcile with the people that we have this history,
You mentioned that it's a personal journey and an institutional one for both of you. I wanted to start with some institutions. So what can universities and schools do for reconciliation?
Well, here at Curtin University, part of my role is to oversee the delivery of the Indigenous Cultural Capabilities Framework, which is an opportunity for students and staff to go through different training and professional development and experiences to build their cultural capacity as a student. So for the students, it's an opportunity to really challenge some of the preconceived notions about what indigeneity is, or who are the traditional owners, why is that information important, and how they can use that information when they go out and become doctors or engineers or journalists or whatever they choose to be. And for our staff, it's an opportunity for them to build the cultural capability to be able to deliver content which actually takes into account the stories and the histories of the First Nations, the First Peoples here. And really it's about capacity building them to be able to work with all students that come here to Curtin University, including Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. So we have that commitment to provide that for our staff and students under that Indigenous Cultural Capability Framework, which is a part of our Reconciliation Action Plan. And Curtin University is one of only 2 universities across Australia that actually have an Elevate Reconciliation Action Plan, which is the top tier reconciliation plan. So we're seen as leaders in reconciliation, but we haven't finished our journey yet by any stretch. There's a lot more work to be done. So Curtin certainly has a very strong commitment to making sure that not only do we keep celebrating the successes of the things that we're doing, but to really think strategically of how we can keep doing that in collaboration with our communities.
I will talk about schools because we've already spoken about the university system. So I spend a lot of time in primary schools, some high schools, not much. But I think for me, the big thing that I find, I'll give you an example. My daughter comes home from school crying. I thought I was over all this stuff, but here we go again, 10 years later. So I've got 3 children, one's 25, one's 20 and one's 10. And I thought, when my son was going through school, things happened at school because he's Aboriginal, same thing happened with my daughter. And now here we go again, 2020, and we're all doing the same again. She comes home really upset and, kids are calling, she's a very dark-skinned girl, so she get called names in class. And then the teacher tried to address some of this and move my daughter away from this kid. So she was the perpetrator, you see, but my kid isn't. She won a citizenship award because she's a very caring kind of girl, very much like her mum, And then the teacher then proceeded to do some class activity on Aboriginal people where they were watching videos of when the colonisers first came and I guess stuff that happened back in history. And she was very upset about what she saw. To me, that's wrong. I think there was no Aboriginal person in that class to explain to those kids why we're watching this and what the impact of this was on those kids. Reconciliation is not just about coming together with 2 groups of people. It is acknowledging what's happened in the past, but that past has felt and rippled all the effects of trauma right through generations of people. Another example is, my dad's a stolen generation survivor. He was taken away at 4 years of age and put into a very cold country in Collie. That the impact of Dad being taken away has had an impact on us as young people in his family. He's got 8 kids, and it's had probably more of an impact on his sons, because he was told his parents were dead, and then he was told his parents didn't want him, but that was all lies. So my father grew up in this space where he wasn't allowed to talk to his sisters or his brother, I should say, and they weren't allowed to talk lingo, they weren't allowed to practice anything, they weren't allowed to, none of that. So he grew up in that space, and so it probably impacted his parenting of us, which has had a huge impact on all of us today. And then what I don't think the non-Aboriginal community don't understand is sometimes they say, well, reconciliation, we don't worry about the past, let's work together now. Well, you can't unless that past is reconciled, because it's had a huge impact on all our families today. And it's really, really difficult to watch. After Curtin, I run a sports program, so I see the impacts of some of that stuff where kids don't go to school because they're looking after protecting themselves because they don't want to be exposed to some of the ridicule and the non-truths at school, but yet they turn up to my sports programs because they know it's a safe place. We don't judge. That's the first thing. Kids are kids. Humans, they're human beings. So reconciliation for me is about treating each other as a human being. And at school environments, primary schools and high schools, they need to really engage the local community way better than they do. A lot of families do not go onto school grounds. They feel so alienated because it's a look, it's a stare, it's a little snigger. And who wants to go there, when you're already feeling no good as it is, It's a really tough place to be. But my ARC project that I won, we're looking at a project called Cultural Learnings, and we're going to do exactly what I just said, to put cultural activities back in schools, develop it with the local Aboriginal community who have ownership of it, and then we come in and we do some testing and see whether or not the school's doing the right thing. So the blame isn't on the Aboriginal folk and the blame isn't on anyone else. It's the part of our history that we both need to claim, because Australia's heritage is also the Aboriginal history, and that has to be claimed first before we can move forward.
If you don't mind, what Arnie says is so true. I mean, we're very different generations, you and I, but
I'm not that old.
Yeah.
I am actually. My knees are sore.
You're still deadly, Arnie. We all know this. But my daughter's 13, and many years, well, not many, but maybe 4 years ago, she comes home saying, "Oh, Mum, today we learnt Nyungar's walk to Uluru." And I said, "Baby, how many times have you seen Mum walk to the shop?" She goes, "Not many." And I said, "Well, do you know where Uluru is?" And she said, "No." And then I showed her, and I said, "Now, how likely is it, all those years ago we would walk all the way to Uluru?" And she said to me, "So is my teacher wrong?" I said, "Well, it's not about wrong or right, even though we know probably the information is not accurate, but it's about your teacher has been afforded a certain version or certain information. She's passed it on to you in the best of intention. However, as a young Nyungar girl, and that for me was around the time I was doing Nyungarpedia, which was the ARC grant that Curtin was involved in, and that was creating the first Aboriginal bilingual Wikipedia page in history. And that took the expertise of all of the non-Indigenous Wikipedia mob, and them teaching us Nyungars, how you create a page and how do you monitor, and how do you do this stuff on the third most, search site in the world, which is Wikipedia. And the Nyungar community working with Wikipedia to say there's just some things that aren't free public knowledge. There's some things that need to have certain permissions, and there's certain cultural nuances and things that you need to understand to be able to have that information. You can't take that photo. And then together, those two worlds work together. We were never supposed to create this thing, but we ended up creating it. So it sounds like you have those experiences with your kids and go, "I can't believe this crap is still happening." But then there's glimmers of hope when you do projects like what Arnie's doing and the Nyungarpedia and the stuff we're doing at Curtin through Now and Up, which gives you hope, because we know there is a lot of Wajula fellas, non-Indigenous fellas out there that want to walk with us. But that's what Arnie said. Yeah. They have to walk with us as we walk with them. And again, for me, that's what reconciliation is about: is walking together in the true, authentic way that you would expect it. Is we're both part of the narrative.
I reckon there's been a shift. I think in the primary schools that I worked with, God, back when I did my PhD. If I would have said anything about Aboriginal anything, they would go, no, we can't do that. No. But now, like, my daughter brought this other assignment home and it was titled The Battle of Pinjarra, right? So you and I both know it is not a battle of Pinjarra, it was a massacre. So I explained to my daughter what really happened. She's like, "What?" I said, "But I need to come talk to your teacher." Now her teacher will talk to me, Like there are, I feel like there's a change in the air and there are really good people out there willing to put their tools down and go, "Well, actually, I never knew and I do want to know," and if they know and I know, then the kids and the families that, that we work with and that are in our community, they'll benefit. I tell you now, if the world was in the hands of the children that I work with in the Curtin Horizons program, this world is going to be brilliant because we've got 16 different nationalities playing in our basketball program alone. And all those kids have been together for 7 years and they get on like a house on fire. So it's kind of like a mini United Nations going, yeah, they might have a smash here or there, but they learn to get over it pretty quickly and they do it together. And that to me is reconciliation, like 101. They just don't talk, they actually do together. We've actually also done some youth summits. We did the Guthu Youth Summit in Kalgoorlie with only Aboriginal kids, and we did the Nala, which was with Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal kids here in Midland. And again, all the kids were trained to event manage and then get on stage and then portray in all the fields of performance what life was like for them, so the people in the audience can understand. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. If there was something bad or sad, they had to say how to make it better. You know, what was their answer for it? You can't, you know. So and reconciliation was a huge part of that. I've got photographs of Aboriginal and Aboriginal kids, Murri kids, other Indigenous groups, all together for one movement, you know. So I'm really proud to be able to have been working with these kids for such a long time, and their families are brilliant, you know, great people. Hey, just give them an opportunity and water in a bit of hope, anything's possible.
In terms of that sharing of knowledge and speaking to people and people being willing to put down their tools and learn, I think there's a role for language in that. And as you were talking about with Wikipedia, can you tell me about the role of language in reconciliation?
So, I mean, my old man, Professor Len Collard from UWA, he was here. He was actually, I think he's still associate professor here actually as well. He once told me that, you know, Nuna Wangi, Dawangi Wirinwa, the language is the way to connect with the old people. And for me, I know in my particular journey when, you know, some terribly traumatic things happened in my childhood, but when I came to Curtin University and I met a guy named Tim McCabe, he told me about how he'd worked with, and this is a Wodjila man, he'd worked with Nyungars and they'd taught him the language, and that, you know, it was very important for me in my healing and progression to learn my language and my culture, and he was dead right. And, you know, we don't have the exposure to language speakers like we used to, you know, particularly, you know, even though my old man is a, you know, strong speaker, during the time the relationship was, you know, on and off because of things that were going on, but I would sit down in the old Aboriginal library at Cas and I would read these books and I would talk to this Wodjila man teaching me about language that he learnt from, you know, a very highly respected elder. And then I started going, well, you know, this is really empowering, and all these things, like things that happened to me that were told that they were part of my culture, and, you know, all this negative stuff around Aboriginality, I don't think this is accurate. And it was the language and it was a learning of culture that started to open up this different door or perception to all of the negative stuff that I'd been fed as a young girl to really support and perpetuate bad people's behaviours. And then, you know, you walk across the road and you've got, you know, Uncle Bob and Auntie Selena Eggington and the Kurumaikwab Healing Centre. Again, the use of language, the use of cultural practice. And I started to realise that, you know, this culture, this language is actually my birthright. It's a huge part of my identity. It's a big part of my strength, and how important that was in my journey to be whatever I chose to be. And that really helped me alleviate this tag of, you know, I'm not what happened to me. I am a powerful Nyungar woman with very strong links to culture, with strong energies and spirits looking after me, and a huge community that wants the best for me. And that really set me on a course of feeling very empowered. So in the work that I'd done, you know, with Noongarpedia and a whole bunch of other stuff I've done, and now the stuff that, you know, I'm supporting here at Curtin, the importance of the language, and not just for our mob, but for our Wodjila mob. Like, you don't have to be Nuna Ma, you are Kulingwa. Your skin colour has no impact on your journey. It shouldn't have any impact on your journey forward. We all know it. We still have these issues around race and colour, but that was never a Nyungar thing. It shouldn't be part of our or any of our journeys together. Our old people want to hear us, you know, Wangi, they want to hear us speaking the language. They want to see humans connecting with the culture and continuing those songlines and continuing that culture. So, you know, my role as a custodian of country is to make sure that when people come onto my ancestors' country, they know the language, they know the culture, they have the connection, they know the rules for their safety and for their empowerment and for their safety. And to finally look at this space, you know, from, you know, the dual lenses that exist. We have the Western world. We can't go backwards. Nothing's going to change in that sense. But, you know, there is the Nyungar cultural world, which includes the language that needs to be understood and respected for all of us to go forward. No, Bawangi, you know, you should be talking Nyungar to me at some stage, brother. You know, me and you have a good yarn, you and sister girl.
Unfortunately, I know more French than Turkish. No, I'm serious.
Mm.
Yeah.
I could speak semi-fluent Italian,
you know,
before I could speak semi-fluent Nyungar.
I speak really good French.
Could you speak to the role of someone like myself who's non-Indigenous learning Noongar language? How important is that maybe for non-Indigenous people?
Well, I mean, first of all, we've got a free online Nyungar language course that you can do that Curtin provides, and you can enrol anytime you like and work through it, and I really encourage people to do it. It's also a bit of a sort of cultural capacity course for people as well, particularly around Nyungar. Why it's important, there's no words to describe the feeling you get as a Nyungar person when you walk into a building and the first thing you see is some kind of Nyungar language, and it's that respect. Someone's taken the time to acknowledge and respect, your language and your culture, and that's automatically, decolonising a space. I mean, there's some work around the university, have a look. But if you're going to work in any industry, if you want to be a journalist, a doctor, an engineer, you're going to work with Nyungar people. And, cultural immersion and cultural capability and the use of culture and language in collaboration with communities is going to be part of your work at one point or another of your career. So it's just another value add. It's another notch in your belt.
Another notch in your belt.
Yeah.
Mm. I reckon I could do a call out to Southwell Primary School and Hilton Primary School. When I first went to Hilton, they had an assembly and all the kids sung a Nyungar song, like all in language. And I was like, wow, this is like, about 12 years ago. When I went to Southwell, everything's bilingual, like in New Zealand. Everything's bilingual. There's English and there's a Nyungar version on everything, all the buildings. It wasn't just a painting. There was all language everywhere. It was brilliant. Then I go into my area where I live and I go to a school, very multicultural, and on the front door is welcome. All the languages, but our language. And there was only 4 letters, K-A-Y-A, right, to put on the front door. And I don't know if the school did it, but that was kind of a shame because the majority of Aboriginal people live where I live in the metro area and they didn't acknowledge even that. So language is really important for places of significance, particularly, the Perth's real name. And, like I always, I put a proposal to a certain local government authority to put bilingual language signs up of corridors of coming into country, and that went out the door. Like they weren't ready for that. But it's, thanks to the work for George Wally as well, because I know George did a lot of work down in Mandurah and did a lot of signage of specific places and bridges and things like that. And it's really good, but that needs to happen everywhere. When people first come to Australia through WA, they don't get to see any of that. Their image of Aboriginal people is someone, very, very dark skinned in the red desert. Well, that's like 6 hours from here, but in Perth it's a little bit different. So the images here and the language that is associated with that is also part of the reconciliation process because we're acknowledged then. And it's a sign of respect as well. So
hang on, didn't us mob walk to Uluru though? Like that's what I've been told recently. No?
I don't know. I think language is important too because we don't just, even though we're on Noongar country and I'm a traditional owner of Wajak Noongar country, I'm married to a Nullarbor Wangata person, you see, and I know his language just as much as I know mine. So my kids have, I think it's 5 cultural, tribes within the, Noongar being one, and which is Wajak, Ewart and Balladong, and then the Wangata people, and it's Nullarbor on his side. So when they all come together, both my husband and I have instilled in our kids those 5 different tribes and what they all mean, where they're located. There's a lot of, talking about languages, there's a lot of similarities between the Wangata and Noongar, but there's also huge differences. So when you're talking about reconciliation and particularly in classrooms with kids, you can't throw all Aboriginal people in one cup and we're all the same because that is not the case at all. And a good example would be going to funerals. So going to a Noongar funeral is generally pretty quiet. It's, I can only say it like that because people show the respect of, there's a lot of hugging, of course, and all that sort of stuff. But you go to a Wongai funeral, it's very different, way different. And I got a big shock when I first went. Even I got a big shock because I wasn't ready for what I was going to see, and it's very loud and a lot of wailing, which is their way of showing respect. And yeah, even me, I'm an Aboriginal person, but even I got a shock, So when we talk to our kids, we have to explain to our kids what's going to happen so they're prepared, So, and it's, I embrace all Aboriginal groups too. I don't stick to Noongar, even though I am Noongar myself. We encourage a lot of non-Aboriginal and other Aboriginal groups into anything that I do, any of the yarns that I have, because I think it's really important, because it comes down to heart. I got a big heart and I like to teach, and I think of everyone as family. And so for me, if that's my way of helping in that reconciliation process, and most people I've come by do have a really good heart. They just may not have learnt, some of the history and some of the other, or they don't know currently why we do things a certain way. And most people have a good listening heart, and they'll sit and they'll be very, just like what you're doing now. I'm reading your body language, like they will do what's needed to get over that first phase. There's a lot of people, in my life now that have been around a long time, because they've got really good hearts and they truly treat people like a human being more than anything. And I really think that's really the key. Aren't we all just one people? There's a lot of differences, I know, but there's also a lot of similarities, I did go to another place of learning. I cannot mention this place. And I was I did a special class for medical students, and I was asked whether or not Aboriginal people were full of blood by a third-year medical student. And I said, "Excuse me?" And I was so frightened that person was going to go out and work in our community. I said, "We're built the same way as you, and the heart's pumping in the same direction. Blood is the same colour." I had to explain that. She didn't really understand, that was a really weird question.
There's a huge duty of care that people like us and many others have when taking our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters on that reconciliation journey, because, we don't want to live in the past. We don't want to be re-traumatised, but like Arnie says, there's that truth-telling that needs to happen so people can make informed decisions. But for a lot of non-Indigenous people that haven't had the exposure to the past and the current situation for a lot of Indigenous people across Australia, it can be very confronting. It can be very traumatic. It basically takes the comfort zone or the understandings in which they've lived in their entire life and just shakes it all up. And so we have an exceptional duty of care to be able to take people on that journey of learning, but at the same time don't scare them off, or, don't traumatise them too much, or, safely take them on that journey, that they don't stay in this, this guilt realm or this, feeling sorry for us stuff. We're telling you this stuff to be informed and feel empowered that you can certainly be a part of the solution, all the solutions going forward, rather than contributing to the ongoing problems. So
that's a good point. And if I look at that with the COAG indicators for our people, and how governments, and I will have a crack at them here, keep the status quo the way it is, so that we are disempowered and the people at the helm are not engaged with the communities they're supposed to be servicing, because we are we're the largest employer of people in Australia, Aboriginal people. And there's a lot of money spent on our people, but the money that flows down to our community is very little, because people who make those decisions are either not on that reconciliation train, or they've jumped off too early. So, they keep the status quo, they keep the system in place to keep us in our place, you see, which is not part of reconciliation at all. You can't empower a community and give them rights unless you go through reconciliation. That's why I was talking about the organisational reconciliation, because there's a lot of systems in place that are quite racial, institutionalised racism, and which goes part and parcel with reconciliation, whether it happens or not. Anyone can have a RAP plan. There's words on a paper. But what you do about it is a different story, and that's how we measure people. People can talk, but what your body language says could be completely different to what you're saying. And it's the same with government levels. The government has a lot to do with our people. So we exist to keep them as true and authentic as possible, but sometimes it's really hard, because the person that you're dealing with at the other end of the phone call, they are a long way off on that reconciliation journey, So and it's very tiring if you're working in a community, and I know you would say this. There's not many of us Aboriginal folk out there. There's not a lot of us anyway. We're not a big population, and the people that are always fighting are getting tired and run down,
If just one final question from me. I'm getting the impression that, actions obviously speak louder than words. What happens next? Sorry, what is the next step that needs to take place for those actions to be speaking louder?
Well, it's staying true, isn't it? If you're going to have a rap, I mean, the middle word is action. So, always being accountable for the actions that are actually within that reconciliation plan. That's the whole point of it, is not to be a document on a shelf. It is a ongoing working document and journey where you say that in relation to respect, opportunities and relationships, we as an organisation are committed to building on that and meeting those key performance indicators we would hope to see. In relation to, Curtin, we have programs, we have, opportunities for people to engage, to come along and have experiences with our community to start their thinking about what part do I play in reconciliation? What's my personal reconciliation action plan that I can reflect on? Because, like Arnie said, if you're a teacher and my 13-year-old's in your classroom, I would hope that during your university training, you've collated a whole bunch of resources and contacts and relationships with the Indigenous community to be able to deliver authentic, material.
So, like you said, the personal journey, I think people personally have to say, I don't know much, I need to know more, I need to go find out, I need to make some friends, I need to socialise, and that's where, and sport's a good place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where, if anyone's out in the Midland, Ellenbrook area, they can come and contact me and I can hook them up. We have a lot of non-Aboriginal people in our programs, our sports programs, and they help us with our kids. We've even given them the title of kinship champions, and some of the adults, because they are kin to their own people. We've taught them how the kinship care model works, and when families are not doing so well when they're by themselves, a lot of Wadjula families are like that, they'll come to us and they'll break down and start crying, I don't have any family, but you do, you have us. So that we're teaching them. We're actively teaching them. We're actually action, and then they give back. So it's all about reciprocity as well as giving back. So on a personal level, it's people opening up their hearts themselves to what's possible. From a school point of view, reconciliation has to happen every day. It's not a once a week like NAIDOC. Cannot happen once a week. And I think in all sorts of institutions and government and everything like that, we need Aboriginal people as leaders with power, not just on advisory committees. We need them to be able to make decisions and someone takes that decision and produces action, and in regards to Australian politics, I guess, I would, and I'll say this, but it might sound, bit radical, but I'll say it anyway. We need our own parliament, because if we're not going to, otherwise I'm on this One Voice with Ken White. We're putting together a co-design of a voice to parliament. And it's good. It's a start in the right place. And we've got to start somewhere. But my legacy, I'm hoping, will be that the next pieces have mandated Aboriginal positions in all levels of parliament, all local government authorities. I hope Welga's out there and they're listening to this. And then with the state and federal, the same thing. And if once we have that done, then hopefully we might have our own parliament, like the Sami people, Norway in the Laplands. I mean, look, they're doing brilliant over there in regards to that, and they did that years and years and years ago, So Australia really want to be really true about reconciliation. We need to be in power ourselves. We don't need anyone talking for us. We're quite qualified, experienced, have the heart, and we'll bring everyone on a journey with us, because that's what reconciliation is really all about.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you again, Ingrid and Cheryl.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share your knowledge on this topic. You've been listening to The Future Of, a podcast powered by Curtin University. If you have any questions about anything that we've raised today, you can get in touch by following the links in the show notes. Bye for now.